selamat datang. Ada beberapa komentar di chat yang nanti saya coba tanggapi ya. Tetapi maaf kalau tidak semuanya akan sempat saya tanggapi. Kita tinggal berapa lama lagi waktunya Pak Sus?
Waktu Indonesia Barat ya.
Dari sekarang tinggal berapa lama lagi?
Sekarang jam 16.30 gitu ya kira-kira. Nanti sampai jam 17. Iya, jam 17.30. Jadi hampir 1 jam lah.
Oke.
Disuruh berhenti, kamu dengar nggak kupingmu?
Oh, siapa itu?
Oke, ya. Jadi kira-kira 1,5 jam lagi atau 1 jam lagi, Pak?
Oh, sebentar, saya lihat. Halo, Pak.
Halo.
Pak.
Gindo.
Pak. Oh, sebentar, Pak. Hari ini sampai jam 18.15 mestinya, ya. Sorry. Oh, sampai jam 18, Pak. Sekarang sekarang jam 4:30 sampai 1,5 jam.
1,5 jam, oke. Good. Ya. Jadi saya akan cerita barang 15 menit atau baru kita punya waktu banyak untuk komentar dan diskusi ya.
Oke.
So I'm going to share my screen now. I am going to talk about a little bit about missing data. You are not going to have lots of practice on missing data, because the whole purpose of this one is only to introduce you to the notion, the idea of missing data and how people solve it, like myself. And I'll show you some of my papers with the solutions to missing data. And the reason I am not going to show you a more extensive solution to missing data, because it is difficult. It'll be too much for you to take in this session. So if you do PhD with me, then I'll teach you that. But it's important just to know that there is such a thing as missing data, and there are certain things that we can do and that I did in my work so that you are familiar with it. So that's the idea. Let me share. It's typically the case, in fact, almost invariably, hampir selalu, it's typically the case that any survey will have missing data. They arise in different variations. Some happen when entering data, so you have erroneous entry. This is an experience that I have, having worked with data from all around the world. At the very beginning, I showed you the papers that I wrote. You can go there to PubMed and you can see all the papers that I wrote, and hopefully you can see that I wrote with data from America, from Europe, from Britain, from 146 countries in the world, including from Indonesia, from Uganda, from Bangladesh, and from hundreds of countries in the world. And it's inevitable that missing data arise in all those. So it is not only a problem with Indonesian survey data, so everywhere. Yeah, you can take my word for it. I wrote papers using data from hundreds of countries around the world. Some happen when a numerator mistaken the logic of questions. So when the enumerators were in the field and asking questions, and there is a logic, if the respondent is a woman, then go here, or if the respondent is a man, then skip there, and so on. So some happen when a numerator mistaken the logic of questions. Maybe they were tired already, or maybe it's raining, or maybe a dog is barking, and so they miss the logic of the question. Some happen when respondents failed to answer part of questions. So no birth certificate, for instance. In Indonesia, that's quite typical. Nggak ada akte kelahiran. Saya nggak punya akte kelahiran. Saya cuma punya catatan pendeta di kampung saya di Siantar sana. So no birth certificate. So missing data. But some missing data arise because some respondent refused to answer certain questions. That's quite common. Yeah, for all sorts of reasons, people refuse to answer questions. And in longitudinal data, this is very advanced, just to tell you. Some respondents in longitudinal studies migrate or died. Yeah, so some of them lost to follow up or migrate, so we cannot find them or we cannot trace them, however hard we try, or some just died. Yeah, and I work a lot with this kind of data, and this is technically known as attrition. So drop out or attrition in longitudinal studies, and this is a particular kind, very difficult to deal with. So here is an example of what I did. This is just to tell you the story. You're not required to do this. This is hard to do, but just to tell you the story. What's going on is I followed about 12,000 older Britons, English people aged 50 to 100 years old. I followed them over 12 years. And as I said earlier, some refused to answer questions. Some others were lost to follow up. Some others died during the period of my study of 12 years. Right? And I look at one particular outcome of cognition, daya pikir, cognition, in particular memory. So that's the title of that graph, episodic memory. I hope you can see that. Yeah. And by the way, this is a paper that I wrote in 2015, Cognitive Aging in Great Britain in the New Century, Cohort Differences in Episodic Memory in +1. There's a digital object identifier or URL at the bottom if you want to see that. But the key point here is only the first two box plots, and there is a lot in here. So I'm going to be very slow, very patient with this. The outcome I'm interested in is episodic memory. So episodic memory from 0 to 20, and higher means better. So better memory, higher scores. Lower memory, lower scores. Yeah, so episodic memory. And I took out an effort to distinguish those who stayed throughout the 12-year study and those who missed the data because of dropout or attrition before the 12-year study. So maybe they drop out in year 2, maybe they drop out in year 3, maybe they drop out up to year 11. Yeah, so that's the gray. Whereas those who stayed with me over 12 years, that's the green, completer. So the dropout and the completer. as I said, you only focus on the first two box plot, the first two. And what it says is that those who complete with me the study tend to have higher episodic memory compared to those who drop out anytime before 12 years. So the gray ones are lower in scores compared to the green ones. Yeah. I hope that is clear. Yeah. That's the only thing that you need to read from this. The rest is you just ignore. So that's the only thing that you need to read here. Namely, the completer, those who stayed with me for 12 years, have episodic memory higher than those who drop out before 12 years. Yeah, the gray one. Okay. What it means is, and this is very important, but don't worry if you don't get this, missing data is informative. If there is something missing, maybe it says something about the outcome. What it means is if their episodic memory score is lower, then they tend to be actually have lower cognitive function. So if I follow a group of 12,000 English people and I found someone to drop out at 4 years, then typically that is informative about their memory. Maybe their memory is lower than average compared to those who stayed with me over 12 years. What that also means is, and this is the important bit, any analysis must account for the fact that some data are missing. That's the only message. I'm not going to show you how to deal with that, how to account for that, because it's complicated, but the message is clear that missing data is not something to be ignored, because missing data may be informative of the outcome we're interested in. Okay, so that's the only message for that. So how did I deal with this in all my papers? You can, like I said earlier, you have a list of my papers, so you can go through that. And how did I deal with that? I acknowledged that there are some missing data. And then I discuss how much damage would missing data do to the conclusion. How do I do that? Well, I test the analytic sample versus the excluded sample. So some have missing data, yeah? So I set them aside and I keep those that have complete data. So I compare these two. In terms of what? In terms of key characteristics such as age, sex, yeah? Or economic status. So are those people who are with me throughout, are they tend to be older or are they tend to be younger? Are they tend to be richer or are they tend to be poorer compared to those who miss some data and therefore get excluded? Okay, so I compare that and I test that. In the syntax, there is an example of that, but you do not need to go that far. If you have time, yes, but if you do not, don't worry. Yeah, but that's how I do it. The reason I compare is for a certain purpose, and the purpose is so that I am very careful in drawing conclusion by saying that, well, this applies to this analytic sample, but it doesn't apply to the excluded sample, which tend to be younger or which tend to be poorer. So my conclusion only applies to a certain group in the population, and therefore my advice would be applicable to certain group, but not to others, simply because of the missing data. Yeah, you see by now that I am very forceful in my conclusion. I'm very clear and very strong, but that's because I'm very careful in devising my analysis and my sample. And so I'm confident. It goes both ways. Yeah. I am forceful because I'm careful. Because I'm careful, I can be forceful. That's why. Yeah. That's why certain papers not get cited, because they are careless and therefore has no force whatsoever. They maybe get published, but no one reads them because they're careless. Yeah. I'm careful and therefore inevitably it's forceful. Yeah. So it's not because saya orang Batak makanya kelihatannya begini. No, it's because I'm careful in my analysis and therefore forceful. The data tells me this because I'm very careful in working with my data. Yeah. And therefore it tells me very clearly what's going on. And I just say it. The fact that it's very clear sounds powerful and forceful. And that's because very careful with the data. So I acknowledge that there are missing data and discuss how much damage would missing data do to the conclusion. And therefore, what is not damaged is presented with some force. I also deal with it in other ways, more sophisticated. Multiple imputation. This is just a phrase or a technique that you will hear. Maybe you will never use it, but it's just there. If you go to advanced sessions, then you'll probably meet it. And even more advanced, multi-level, multiple imputation. The paper that I cited earlier, Maharani Tampubolon 2014, Unmet Need for Cardiovascular Care, that was cited by the minister. The reason in longitudinal studies is joint modeling of attrition and outcome. You can read it in my paper, Tampubolon 2015 and 2015B. These are hard to do well, so it's there. Maybe I'll show you two examples, yeah? Or maybe not, yeah, because we soon run out of time. So here are my questions. If you are inspired by the analysis above on the effect of stunted in 1993 on depression later, 20 years down the road, or the effect of underweight in 1993 and its effect on depression in adulthood, if you are inspired, I want to know from you what knowledge or training do you want to get, and what materials or data do you want to get. This is just for me to know more about where you want to go next. And I'll stop sharing here. So that's a short session on missing data, yeah, just to tell you what it is and how I deal with it. I'm not going to teach you how to run it in Stata. It's hard to do. And the last one is, you've been with me for hours now, and you've seen the many analysis. If you like that, what kind of training you think you need and what kind of data you think you need. Now it's open to everybody. If not, if you have no view, if you have any other questions throughout the day that you want to raise with me, any comments throughout the day you want to raise with me, this is the open discussion session now. I think we have about an hour or more if people want to ask me questions while I go through some of the chat to but I will open it first before I go through the chat. Bu Dewi. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Prof. My name is Dewi. Actually, I never done a longitudinal study before. And do you think that penelitian yang kokoh penelitian yang kokoh yang Anda sebutkan sebelumnya itu, apakah it has to be longitudinal study? Apakah harus merupakan sebuah longitudinal study, terutama apabila kita mau melakukan suatu evaluasi terhadap suatu intervensi, katakan seperti itu. Karena jujur saja saya belum pernah melakukan suatu longitudinal study karena lots of challenges ya, banyak sekali tantangan gitu, dari waktu, dari biaya, kemudian yang tadi missing data itu juga suatu suatu tantangan yang sangat sulit kalau saya, apalagi saya memang istilahnya masih junior staff gitu ya, jadi masih baru lulus lah istilahnya seperti itu. Jadi apakah harus suatu studi itu dilakukan secara longitudinal and baru itu bisa mendapatkan suatu nilai lebih untuk komunikasi yang seperti Bapak katakan tadi, komunikasi dalam sebagai jurnal yang bagus, seperti itu Pak. Terima kasih Prof.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Dewi. I think I said this in a meeting with the assistants, and I typically say this as well throughout when I teach in Indonesia. As I mentioned earlier, I taught in FK UGM some time ago, and I typically say this as well to them, which is, you are right in suspecting that there may be value added in doing longitudinal analysis if you want to publish in good journals. You're right. I'm an editor and I'm also a reviewer. If I see two papers, one doing cross-sectional analysis to see the associations between stunting and consumption, and I see another paper analyzing the same thing using longitudinal data, which one do you think I should publish?
The longitudinal, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. So why? Because the longitudinal analysis allows you to discount or to test what doesn't work or what is not the explanation. For instance, if in a cross-sectional study, you cannot easily discount the fact of the third variable may be affecting both. Whereas in longitudinal analysis, at least you can minimize that by saying, well, because the exposure is previous or prior to the outcomes, therefore we minimize that. Yeah. And also because the causal conceptual relation is reflected temporally. The cause precedes the effect. Yeah. So when I say stunted leads to loss of earnings 20 years later, well, that's because stunted was measured in 1993 and earning was measured in 2015. It is stronger. Whereas if you look at it cross-sectionally, of course, you cannot do that because when a child is stunted, of course, a child cannot earn money. Yeah. So your suspicion about or your anticipation about longitudinal study is stronger, has higher value added that will allow you to publish in good journals and influence policy. Your anticipation is correct. Now, What does that mean then? Well, it means you have to learn the techniques. And I promise you, it's not that hard, but it's not that easy either. But it's just something that we have to learn, and we can learn together. Yeah, and there are facilities for that. But longitudinal analysis does give you extra boost if you want to publish, or if you want to influence policy. I know that because I'm an editor, and also I'm a reviewer. Yeah. Having said that, yeah, you in Indonesia are actually fortunate. And this is the bit that I usually say to many Indonesians. Yeah. Indonesia itu kan amburadul, ya.
Yes.
Ya, banyak yang stunting, gitu ya. Betul nggak? Banyak yang wasting, nggak selesai-selesai, gitu. Banyak deforestasi, nggak selesai-selesai, gitu. Banyak yang mati COVID, gitu. Indonesia itu kan amburadul. Sehingga kalau mau meneliti tentang Indonesia itu gampang. Pasti hasilnya signifikan, karena banyak yang mati, banyak yang amburadul, banyak yang stunting, banyak yang wasting. Hasilnya pasti statistically signifikan. Sabar aja mengumpulkan datanya. Pasti hasilnya signifikan. Iya, wong Indonesia itu amburadul. Saya kalau nulis makalah Indonesia itu gampang. Nulis makalah Inggris dan Amerika susah. Nulis makalah Indonesia itu gampang, karena Indonesia itu amburadul. Banyak yang mati, banyak yang stunting, nggak habis-habis, hutannya gundul, kepalanya aja botak gitu. Gampang nulis tentang Indonesia. Indonesia itu amburadul.
Tetapi kan kalau banyak yang mati, apalagi yang migrate kan, it's a chance to be the missing data, Prof. And,
makanya belajar pakai missing data analysis. Very hard to do, tapi ASRI bisa. Itu multiple imputation for unmet need for cardiovascular care in Indonesia. Itu Indonesia itu. Pakai data IFLS. Ya itu, terbit gara-gara itu, salah satu. Bukan cuma di Indonesia itu banyak yang sakit jantung tapi tidak sadar, walaupun datanya hilang, kami bisa multi-level multiple imputation. Sehingga nggak susah terbitnya itu. Bukan cuma terbit, dibaca orang itu. Bukan cuma dibaca orang, dibaca menteri itu. Iya. Jadi enak di Indonesia itu, amburadul. Jadi kalau mau meneliti tentang Indonesia itu, gampang. Kalian aja nggak tahu kerjaan kalian apa. Sampai sekarang nggak nulis-nulis tentang Indonesia. Iya.
Baik, Prof. Jadi conclusionnya bahwa missing data itu sendiri it can be very valuable ya, Prof. Kalau
very valuable.
Dengan analisis missing data yang tadi Prof sudah sampaikan, tapi memang tidak easy untuk belajar tentang menganalisis missing data tersebut. Seperti itu ya, Prof, tantangannya, Prof.
Yeah, but not that difficult either. Prof. Sama-sama, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Not that difficult, not that difficult. I will ask Takashi at some point, to provide such training. But yeah, so all the Indonesian students, PhD student in my group, I do not allow them to go back to Indonesia until they know how to do multiple imputation. I do not allow them to go back to Indonesia until they know how to draw a map. I do not allow them to go back to Indonesia until they publish in where I published. I do not allow them to go home until they accomplish something. Berikut, Bu Nur Indrawati.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih. Ada longitudinal study, itu kan lama, kemudian juga data makin lama makin banyak. Tentu kita tidak mau ada missing data, walaupun Bapak sudah memberitahu bagaimana cara menganalisisnya. Tapi sekarang saya mau tanya, begitu kan, untuk menghilangkan kesempatan atau meminimalisir kesempatan supaya ada missing data itu, apakah memang perlu harus double entry? Sejauh mana itu memang perlu? Kalau tidak, kalau itu kan juga menghabiskan dana juga kalau double entry. Apa pendapat Bapak?
Kalau especially in Indonesia, I think my expertise, one of my expertise is working with missing data. In fact, the British government pay me for just because one of those expertise. Not many people work with missing data because it's hard to work with. Having said that, the best solution for missing data is to have no missing data.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I design research, as I mentioned earlier, you all know that, by the way, if you put into Google, well, I gave you the list of my papers, right? Or if you put into Google Scholar, smart health, one word, you will see a number of papers that we published on that, including in Journal of American Medical Association. Now, because I was inspired by the solution to missing data, that is not to have missing data, we spend money to avoid missing data.
By?
All sorts of things, double entry, the latest tablets, the latest notebook, internet connection, paying the enumerator good money. Yeah, here is one way of doing it. Jangan menghemat kalau mengumpulkan data.
Okay.
Pay them well. Give them technologies. Because if you have missing data, yeah, if you have missing data, you get non-significant result. There's nothing you can do about it. You scratch your head and all your hair loss and so on. There's not much you can do about it. The data is missing, it is missing. So the best way of dealing with missing data is not to miss data. Yeah. If it requires money, find money. If it requires sweat, go sweat. If it requires not sleeping, don't sleep. Don't lose data. Don't miss data. But if something inevitable happens, then I have techniques to deal with that. But this is the last recourse, and I do not recommend it. Does that answer your question?
Ya, ya memang seharusnya begitu. Oke, kadang-kadang juga ya sesudah penelitian berlangsung baru ada hal-hal yang teringat. Ya, terima kasih.
Gitu. Sudah kasep, sudah kelewatan, sudah dan kita nyesal dan papernya nggak terbit-terbit.
Ya. Oke, terima kasih.
Ada yang lain? Any more question?
May I ask facilitator something to you?
Yeah. Who is this?
Aldi.
Oh, Aldi, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if there is another question, I mean, I also want to ask, especially, I'm sorry, I'm using my mask because I'm in the mother office. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I want to ask is the one that previously you shown about the stunting and the depression.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, a participant asked about it first. If I am not wrong, it's Mrs. Ida from Balitbangkes. So that's why it is linear between the age and the probability to get depressed and comparison between the stunted child and the normal child. I mean, what I wanna ask first, I mean, you already told us that the data isn't enough to show the other pattern besides the linear pattern that shown by the age factor and also the stunted child and the depression. But what I want to ask is, could we try to age square it? I mean, there is a variable of age, and maybe could we add variables to age squared? So maybe if we get age squared, we can get the first order differentiation, and we get the optimum age, whether it's the maximum depression or maybe minimum depression. Even I know that depression is qualitative dependent. So outcome for each individual will be, of course, different. So I don't know, is it feasible to H-square them? I mean, that's the first. And then the second is what I want to ask is the depression and also the stunting problem is it, I mean, is the depression really exogenous variable? Because what I mean is maybe it's also simultaneous and maybe it needs also further analysis whether the mother itself, the mother of the child is depressed or not, and maybe mother depression is also, and maybe it's more at some degree exogenous variable that influence the stunting problem in the child, and also later in life, the children would get depressed 20 years after they are growing. And then, I mean, if the mother's depression at some degree exogenous, and it's not really pure exogenous, I mean, is it influenced again? The mother depression, is it influenced again by some of economic factor? Because if you know, I mean, I have shared you that I write mental health in relation with the housing assets, that it's in the FLS, the household has module harta, I mean assets module, right? So it's also estimate the value of housing assets, not only the rent value of it. And actually there is a study that I also share with you that in 2008 there is a subprime mortgage. Of course it's a global financial crisis. And Yilmazer from Ohio State University write on the same journal as you, Social Science and Medicine, that is diminished of housing asset value can influence the health of its household member, of course. So that's why I also interested in that. So what I mean is it's still related that the thing that you mentioned before, that the cash transfer and non-cash transfer or conditional cash transfer. So could it be maybe the program that we have in Indonesia, it's maybe has influence to make poorer people get better life, but it's not in the magnitude. It's not big push enough to lift them from poverty and lift them from the stunted child. I mean, maybe should them get more, for example, PKH program. I mean, PKH is also CCT program, and for example, household get 500,000 rupiahs for 3 months, I guess. So could we try? Should we prove it whether the CCT transfer is not big push enough? I mean, maybe they need something bigger or bigger social safety net, or such as, I mean, it's controversial. Maybe it's universal basic income, for example. Although I know that the fiscal constraint in Indonesia is, I mean, fiscal space is not enough for that. But maybe what if some family who got CCT got more, I mean, CCT, increase in CCT, for example, not only 400,000, maybe they get 2 million or 3 million rupiah. So maybe it could, in magnitude term, could also make mother's depression got less, or maybe they mother got well-being, and also it's also in the end it's also reduce the stunting. I mean, that's 3 questions for me. I'm sorry, it's too long.
Yes, it is too long. In fact, it's 4 questions. Now, let me just list those questions, and you're only allowed to ask 2. So you make decisions because there are other people around here. Okay, so your first question was about quadratic age effect on depression. your second question is about whether mother's depression should be included as well in explaining depression 20 years later. And your third question, whether household assets, especially the diminution of household assets, explain depression in adulthood. And 4, whether cash transfer is also should be studied in explaining depression in Indonesia, for instance, using the program PKH and other program in Indonesia. Now, those are 4 questions. Which one do you want me to answer? I'm going to answer 2.
Square age and the mother depression. I guess that's the first.
Okay, square age and mother's depression. Okay, now I just want to make sure that everybody understand your question. Yeah, okay. That everybody understand your question. So someone else also asked the question, Ida from Balitbangkes, as you said, that because I only use age term, I did not include squared age term. The effect, therefore, is linear. And so when it is negative, as people get older, depression, decreases. Okay, so negative coefficient or negative marginal effect. And you ask, and other people ask the question, well, should it not be quadratic? So it may be increase followed by decrease, or decrease followed by increase. And there is a benefit if you allow a quadratic term. You know when is the peak or when is the bottom of depression and so on. And as you rightly noticed, I sometimes use quadratic age as well, so that I can see whether certain things are constant, whether certain things are declining and followed by increase, or the other way around. And I gave you an example already, and you all have that paper when I compared the depression trajectories of Americans and English people. And then you said, can't we not just include age square, because we have age variable in there? Can we not include age square? Now, here is an important. I'll give you a short answer, and I'll give you a more elaborate answer that showed how a researcher like myself, who has written a lot of papers that people read, think about things. You have age variable in there. There is nothing that prevents you to use age square. So the short answer is yes, you can. But, and this is the reason why I designed this session today like it is. Namely, I didn't just show you the syntax, the Stata software, the WHO software, but I tell you the story about malnutrition, the depressing, shameful story about malnutrition in Indonesia, to show you the context before you type your Stata command. Yeah? It is important to think first before we type the analysis. What is it about including age square? What are we doing when we include age square? What we are doing when we include age square is to say, as they grow older, then they may increase and then decrease, or conversely, yeah? But there is a change, yeah, as they grow older. But there's nothing in our data, because we only have, at least the design there, we only have one observation, one cross-sectional observation. There is nothing that tells us that next year it follows this. Well, because only one observation, not 2. The American study and the English study that I published, I followed them 12 years. So I have the observations. so that I can confidently say that they follow these trajectories. Another way of putting it is this. Can you include h squared? Yes, of course you can include h squared. Why not include h cubic? Why not include h quadratic? Why not include h quintic? Why not include h septic? Why not include, do you understand what I mean? Yeah?
Yeah.
There is nothing that prevents you from doing that, but you're not thinking.
Yeah.
Think first before typing. Thinking always precedes typing. Otherwise, you'll never publish.
Okay.
That's how I publish. I think first. So all this lost hair is not because some hot water on top of my head. Bukan keseduh air panas ini makanya saya botak. Ini karena memang mikir kok. Think first before you type the analysis.
Yeah, I mean.
Jadi boleh pakai H kuadrat bisa, H pangkat 3 bisa, H pangkat 4 bisa, H pangkat 7 juga bisa. Tapi kenapa melakukan itu? Mikir dulu.
Yeah.
Gitu. Ya, kalau memang nggak masuk akal itu, jangan. Cross section boleh pakai kuadrat, boleh. Kalau untuk eksplorasi ya, saya jarang pakai itu. Tapi kalau mau pakai kuadrat, pastikan kalau boleh, ya, outcomes-nya itu diukur berkali-kali, longitudinal. Kalau cuma diukur sekali, biarpun boleh, jangan tergoda. Gitu. Di Indonesia itu perlu membedakan boleh dengan bisa. Gitu. Bisa pakai kuadrat, bisa pakai pangkat 3, bisa pakai pangkat 4, bisa, apa boleh? Think. Yeah? Is that okay? Does that answer your question? Begitu juga Bu Ida ya? Boleh aja. Terbit apa enggak? Didengar sama menteri apa enggak? Lain cerita itu. So, mother's depression. Yes, it could be mother's depression during childhood. So, simultaneous with the child's nutrition status can last that long, but I doubt it. And one reason is this. What would be the biological and psychological mechanism that lasts that long? I find it difficult to think of it. By the way, I wrote in International Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry, so I know a little bit about psychology. I'm not making this up. And I wrote in American Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry. Not only International Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry, I also wrote in American Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry. So I know a little bit about psychiatry. Yeah. Saya bukan pura-pura psikolog. I wrote, and people read my papers. So I know a little bit about it. Yeah. So the point is, I have to think hard first and be convinced that indeed mother's depression can last that long, 20 years. If I cannot find a biological reason, and if I cannot find a psychological reason, then I shouldn't include it. But I can see that not all of you believe me. You can put it in and just include it and see, I promise you, it won't be significant. Yeah. By the way, I actually look at effect over 80 years. I have a number of papers. The long arm of childhood condition in Great Britain, that's about 80 years long effect. So, and that's the effect on depression, by the way. That's I'm not going to show you that paper, but you can read it. Its title is The Long Arm of Childhood Condition in Great Britain. I look at depression, muscle function, and cognition. Yeah. But if you want to look at it in Indonesia, mother's depression and child stunting and the effect 20 years later on depression, I struggle to think through very carefully the psychological and biological reason why it should matter after we included what we included in there. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
That's answer.
Further, Any other comment?
Comment for me? Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, to be confirmed more about it. I mean, yeah. So I mean, if we use stunted chart in 1993 and we compare depression in 2014, I mean that's just 2 point of time, and so I mean because we just have that 2 point of time of data, we cannot sure enough whether it's it has that quadratic pattern or something like that.
Yeah.
So we need to check more whether it is valid for 2000. I mean, wave 3 of FLS, for example, let's say. I mean, and then 2007 or even maybe in the 1998. So I mean, we cannot test between two, but maybe we can be more sure if we test more data or more wave in FLS. That's what I get, maybe. Is it correct?
You get half of it.
Oh, okay.
So you got it wrong. What you got wrong is you are on the right track of having more data, more waves, and you went earlier. So from 2014 or 15, you went to the earlier data, 2007. Yeah? Okay, that's what you said, right? Or the 1997, yeah? Or 2000 or 1997, yeah? That's what you said, yeah?
Yeah.
So part of it is right, but ultimately it is wrong. Here is how.
Okay.
And this is again the reason, by the way, everybody else, I'm pretty sure you're all bored because this is very esoteric, but this is how scientists think. So bear with me. You can all get a cup of coffee and come back. It will take 3 minutes, this one, because I need to correct. This is typical of Indonesian thinking, which is completely wrong. So if you do not understand it, don't worry. Not many Indonesians can understand it. So you go and get a cup of coffee. Now, Aldi must stay here because he's wrong and I want to correct him because I have a reputation to keep. I teach him, so he has to get it right. Now, your intuition is correct that you need extra waves. And you go for earlier waves. Yeah, that intuition is correct. However, the biology is wrong. Namely, when you look at them in 2000, yeah, how old are they? 7 years old. Yeah. They're not adults. The biology of adults are different from the biologies of a child. So if you want to look at a different waves, look at waves after 2015. The fact that there is not yet waves, that is a restriction that won't allow you to answer your question. And you just have to put up with it and swallow it. Okay. But don't go back because the biology is wrong. And you will get rejected because of the biology. Yeah. So that's again another instance where thinking must precede typing. So you want to type straight away and use 2000. No, think about it. When I use 2000, what would be the stage in life that this person I'm following? Well, this is a different stage. Biologically, they're different. Yeah? Do you understand now?
Yes, I understand this. So I mean,
okay.
Yeah, let me repeat again to check whether I'm wrong or not. So
yeah,
so I cannot go back to add extra data from the previous waves because I mean from 1993 until even 2000 or 2007, maybe even if we add extra, I mean they are still, I mean the child who born in 1993 is still children, or whether they are going is they are just still a teenager maybe or a young adult.
Yeah.
I mean they are not adult yet. So if I want to check that quadratic or something, that pattern, I just cannot use the FLS But if IFLS has the next survey, I mean, maybe after 7 years after 2014, which is 2022, 2023, for example, I don't know, yeah, maybe it's something like that. And maybe we can add more. I mean, until these children, 1993, got into the adulthood, so maybe I can check their pattern, whether it's correct or not, because we have comparison between the adult biology and the children biology, not only just in their childhood or teenage teenage condition. Yeah. That's
Do you get that?
Yeah, I get it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any more question? Any more comment?
Prof, I would like to confirm, please. First, we need the important thing is about the theory, the biological theory itself.
Absolutely.
We must, that we must. What do you call? Kerangka teorinya mesti benar dulu gitu. Jadi dalam artian, ketika kita tahu pathophysiology in children and adult, early adult, and then late adult, let's say maybe like middle age.
Kalau teenager itu kan hormonnya lagi tambah dan segala macam, susah. Kalau kalian punya anak teenager di rumah, susah ngaturnya. Kalau mau meneliti itu disamakan dengan adult, ya kacau.
Iya, betul. Dulu. Dan nanti kalau misalnya kita berarti nanti seharusnya kita bisa mengeluarkan lagi ketika mungkin middle adult as in like apakah degenerative diseases udah keluar di usia 35 atau 40 pada saat itu, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If we continue this study, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell you something.
Okay.
Just along that line. The importance of understanding biology. I'm sorry for everybody else who for whom this may be too far, but the point is the same for everybody. The biology drives everything. The biology drives everything. You can type the analysis, but it will be rubbish if the biology is not thought through. Now, I'll give you another example. That paper on unmet need for cardiovascular care in Indonesia, that breaks ground. One is, I started it at the age of 40. And that's quite a finding in Indonesia. Here is how it works, And I'll say this in Indonesian so that you will not miss it, you will not misunderstand it. Di luar negeri, di Eropa, di Amerika gitu, orang yang berisiko jantung itu biasanya risiko jantung itu mulai tinggi ketika mereka umur 60-an. Tapi di Indonesia banyak orang mati karena angin duduk umur 40-an. Betul enggak? Pernah dengar angin duduk?
Iya.
Ya, bukan angin itu, bukan duduk itu, jantung itu. Ya. 40-an mati angin duduk, 45 udah mati. Ya, anak istrinya jadi yatim, jadi janda gitu. Stroke. 40-an. Nggak usah 60 gitu. Pernah dengar orang Indonesia umur 49 stroke? Banyak ya?
45 bahkan. Iya,
45 bahkan. Stroke gitu ya. Nah, di luar Indonesia itu 60-an. But I made a decision. Karena Indonesia itu, kayak tadi saya bilang, kan amburadul kan, gampang. 40 udah berisiko, beneran. Banyak di Indonesia, ketika kita ambil darahnya, kita ukur high sensitivity C-reactive protein, triglycerides, kolesterol, dan lain-lain, banyak yang berisiko jantung. 40-an itu. Jadi, biologinya sangat menentukan. Dan itu membuat saya memutuskan mulai dari 40, lihat. Udah banyak orang Indonesia yang berisiko kardiovaskuler, cerebrovaskuler, jantung, stroke, dan kawan-kawannya itu. Sekarang lebih parah lagi ya, diabetes ya.
Betul, Prof. Betul.
Itu. Jadi, the biology drives it. Okay, any more question? Ini tinggal berapa menit lagi nih?
30 minutes again. 30
Ada
menit
lagi?
lagi, Pak.
Nggak ada lagi pertanyaan? Well, I hope you learn something.
Pak Gindo,
Ya.
sorry, one question. Tadi karena Mas Aldi fasilitator tanya, saya juga tertarik tanya ini. Mumpung ada Pak
Siapa
Gindo.
nih?
Esa.
Esa, ya. Maaf, saya nggak bisa lihat gambarnya. Ya, oke.
Saya bahasa Indonesia saja agar yang lain juga bisa mengikuti. Ini pertanyaan dari dulu teman saya pernah tanya dan ini masih mengganggu saya sampai sekarang karena saya belum juga bisa jawab. Stunting ini kan indikator yang diukur dengan distribusi ya, dipatok dengan distribusi menggunakan WHO Child Growth Standard. Nah, pertanyaannya itu adalah kenapa kita menggunakan ukuran relatif? Kalau low birth weight kan kita patok 2.500 gram begitu ya, di bawah itu low birth weight. Sementara stunted dan wasted ini menggunakan ukuran relatif, ada yang -2 standar deviasi, ada yang -3. Nah, pertanyaannya waktu itu juga, ini kan kalau ketika sudah distribusi ini sudah bergeser, tetapi kita masih matoknya pakai standar deviasi, itu tidak akan hilang by definition. Itu satu. Yang kedua, apakah dalam penghitungan Z-score di dalam growth standarnya WHO ini sudah memperhatikan ethnicity? Karena itu, saya pribadi tidak tahu biologi di balik pertumbuhan, tetapi saya kok menduga ethnicity akan berperan juga terhadap tinggi ataupun berat. Nah, bagaimana kita disentangle efek ini dengan efek nutrisi? Terima kasih.
Ya, yang kedua itu gampang itu. 40 tahun lalu semua orang Cina berpikiran seperti itu juga. Tapi sekarang kalau kalian nonton NBA, banyak orang Cina di sana kan? Tahu NBA, basket?
Yes.
Ya? Jangkung. Dulu, 40 tahun lalu, orang Cina juga berpikir begitu. Ini memang kita orangnya pendek-pendek kok orang Cina ini gitu. Tapi begitu mereka makmur, mereka bilang, oh enggak, kita ini sama jangkungnya dengan orang Amerika. Bahkan banyak orang Cina yang main di NBA-nya Amerika. Bahkan mencetak gol lebih banyak daripada orang Amerika. Nggak ada itu. Orang Jawa bukan pendek-pendek. Kalian aja yang miskin. Kalau kalian kaya, kalian pasti sejangkung orang Amerika, sejangkung orang Cina. Nggak ada itu ketinggalan karena kita orang Indonesia, maka kita itu pendek-pendek dan kurus-kurus. Nggak ada itu. Kalau becus diberesin, pasti kalian sejangkung orang Inggris, sejangkung orang Amerika, sejangkung orang Cina. Nggak ada itu. Yang pertama, kan ini pakai relatif ya, nggak macam berat badan waktu lahir. Nah, kalau nanti semuanya kaya raya orang Indonesia itu, tetap aja kita nanti ada yang stunting karena tetap aja ada yang di bawah 3 standar deviasi. Gitu pertanyaannya kan?
Betul, Pak.
Nah, jawabannya gimana itu menurutmu?
Saya waktu itu jawabnya karena standar yang kita pakai itu standar dengan waktu tertentu yang ditetapkan oleh WHO itu.
Setelah kau dengar ini, menurutmu gimana? Menurutmu?
Setelah
Jadi kayak tadi ya, kalau Indonesia itu rame-rame kaya, rada becus, penyamun semua ditangkap KPK, nggak ada lagi yang berkeliaran di luar gitu ya. Nah, sehingga Indonesia itu benar semua anggaran kesehatan itu memang nyampe ke penduduk gitu, sehingga rame-rame semua cukup makmur. Tetap akan ada yang di bawah standar deviasi, 3 standar deviasi. Nah, menurutmu jadi gimana? Apa? nggak apa-apa, ini bukan benar salah.
Mungkin butuh new standard ya.
Menurut saya sih enggak. Alhamdulillah kalau nanti semuanya itu kaya raya sehingga mereka semua asupannya itu jadi bagus. Bahwa nanti masih ada 0,01% di bawah 3 standar deviasi, bahwa nanti masih ada 12 orang yang kurus, kerdil atau pendek, memang distribusi atau ketidakpastian pengukuran dan lain-lain itu akan selalu memberikan pencilan. Tapi saya tidak khawatir kalau nanti ada 0,5% di sebelah sana dari 3 standar deviasi itu. Ada yang lebih penting. Ternyata kalian masih 25% ya, yang di sebelah sananya 2 standar deviasi itu. Jadi buat saya, ya, saya nggak terlalu peduli bahwa ukurannya itu relatif. Sama seperti jawaban saya terhadap pertanyaan nomor 2. Saya tidak percaya jawaban karena ini etnisitas. Mungkin itu menentukan, tapi seupil. Maaf, upil tahu nggak apa?
Tahu Pak, tahu.
Nah, ya. Tapi itu seupil. Gitu. Begitu juga ini. Pertanyaanmu yang pertama. Kan itu ukuran relatif. Emangnya kenapa? Sebab ada yang lebih penting daripada mengganti ukuran relatif itu, yaitu mengurangi dari 25% ini ke 24%, ke 20%, ke 18%, ke 10%, ke 5%, ke 2%. Kalau ada 0,5% yang masih di sebelah kanan dari 3 standar deviasi itu, nggak apa-apa. Ini aja udah susah. Ngapain mikir yang lebih jauh lagi? Ya, tapi kalau mau yang lebih ilmiah, ukuran itu sudah dipakai di mana-mana dan dalam prakteknya ya tidak bisa mengubah secara substansial pesan bahwa ada perbaikan, ada bencana, ada yang mesti dilakukan gitu. Sekali lagi yang penting itu ya teorinya atau pesan kebijakannya. Detailnya ini ya bisa nomor 2. Itu sudah dipakai di ratusan negara ya, dan memang bisa menolong kita mengambil keputusan memperbaiki status gizi ibu dan anak-anak. Kita pakai itu aja dulu. Dalam kenyataannya nanti nggak ada pengaruh kok itu. Kalau Esa mau menanggapi lagi kayak Aldi tadi boleh juga.
Cukup Pak Gindo.
Ya, ya. Kalau ada lagi, kalau tidak ada lagi,
atau lagi Prof?
Ada Pak. Silakan. Monggo.
Ini,
Siapa
Prof,
nih? Monggo.
Agus Prof. Tadi mohon saran dan masukan Prof. Terkait untuk mengevaluasi stunting itu seharusnya periode waktunya itu setahun sekali kah ataukah 5 tahun sekali? Kemudian yang kedua untuk targetnya itu sebaiknya baduta ataukah balita, Prof? Mengingat kan ketika bicara golden period kan sampai 2 tahun ya kita bisa memperbaiki stunting. Terima kasih, Prof.
Sama-sama. Nah, ini gampang jawabnya. Mana Teguh tadi itu? Teguh yang tadi nanya itu masih ada dia? Yang dari Aceh itu tadi loh. Oh, udah pulang ya? Ya wes, nggak apa-apa. Nah, saya kira jawabannya yang pertama, I would like to monitor it more frequent, so more frequent than 5 years. If you have funds and if you have programs, I think every year it should be monitored. But if you do not have funds, more than every 5 years, I think in Indonesia you do risk assess every 3 years, right? And I think you should follow that at least. I would like it to be more frequent. Saya yang meneliti Inggris dan Amerika tadi itu setiap 2 tahun gitu. But tergantung kalian lah. Kalau uangnya ada, paling tidak setiap 3 tahun gitu. Nah, baduta atau balita, ini saya mau ngajak si Tuku tadi itu karena idenya dia bagus. Kan kalian ada baduta, bayi 2 tahun gitu ya. Cukupkah hanya memantau itu atau balita? Kan gagasannya Teguh tadi itu adalah kalaupun di baduta dia jelek, bisa aja ada recovery sesudah itu, dan kalau recovery itu memang terjadi, ya di booster dan seterusnya, bisa jadi apa yang saya tunjukkan 20 tahun kemudian depresi itu tidak terjadi. Jadi recovery itu memang betul-betul menyelamatkan si anak ini. Ya. Kebayang? Itu pertanyaan ilmiahnya Tuku tadi, which is very good. Ya, mesti diteliti itu. Nah, bagaimana kalian bisa menjawab itu kalau kalian hanya melihat baduta, tidak mengikuti balita, gitu loh, gitu. Karena itu mungkin kok secara biologis bahwa apa yang terjadi di 2 tahun itu masih bisa di-recover. Itu pertanyaan empirik itu, bukan pertanyaan teoritis. Ya, ada kemungkinan kok itu. Jadi kita mesti periksa itu. Dan bagaimana meriksanya kalau kita nggak mengumpulkan datanya? Angan-angan aja, kayak tadi. Bagaimana kalau kita bikin bilateral, multilateral, multifaktorial? Itu angan-angan semua itu, nggak ada datanya itu. Ya, nah supaya bisa menjawab itu semua, kumpulkan datanya. Ikuti setiap, nggak tahu saya, 3 tahun, 2 tahun, gitu ya. Dan 20 tahun kemudian periksa, apa betul dia depresi apa enggak. Jangan-jangan yang memang stunted, baduta, waktu dia balita, karena misalnya ada program untuk memperbaiki asupannya, dia jadi tidak stunted, kita lihat 20 tahun kemudian, apakah memang dia bebas dari depresi, berkurang, apakah, dan seterusnya. Ya, so to answer your question, I think regularly monitor it, at the very least every 3 years. If you monitor all the way to baduta, balita, not baduta. Ya.
Iya, bentar,
Okay.
satu lagi.
Yeah.
Kan ada yang memberikan pendapat kalau setahun sekali kan itu masih sulit untuk melihat perubahan prevalensi stuntingnya, Prof. Apakah masih memungkinkan juga kalau setahun sekali sebagai untuk melihat surveillance-nya, Prof?
Kalau ada uang kalian setiap tahun lah. Anak itu setahun punya anak nggak? Itu kan bisa gitu, ya kan? Gitu. Ya, tapi kalau nggak ada uang,
rencananya setahun sekali sih, Bro.
Iya, kalau ada uang setahun sekali lah. Nah, kalau bisa kalian juga memantau dia longitudinal, gitu ya. Atau kalau mahal longitudinal itu setengah-setengah gitu. Setiap tahun atau setiap 2 tahun gitu loh. Is that okay?
Oke, makasih, Bro.
Yeah. Okay. One last question.
Sudah bisa aja kelihatan.
Sudah.